Okay, so building in this risk analysis, risk management space. So we've talked about business continuity planning, we've talked about business impact assessment. I've covered very briefly this concept of the maximum allowable outage. Again, takeaways for you guys in the entrepreneur community out there, it's about having a systematic and considered way of thinking about the business, its objectives, the risks that you face in relation to those objectives. Business continuity planning, one of the best ways, and certainly one of the best ways of establishing good business continuity risk management in these times, and I would argue in any time, is using a tool called the bow tie analysis. It can be, or it certainly is often used in quite a complex fashion in sectors such as chemical processing, offshore petroleum and gas, the extractives industry. It's certainly, though, also becoming really commonplace in the financial services sector and other sectors well outside of where it traditionally came from. And yeah, sorry, bad dad joke. I love a good dad joke, so hence the bow tie. So, what value is the bow tie to you guys as small business owners or members of the KPI community? For me, I think that it's a great narrative, pictorial way of trying to unpack risks, controls, unwanted events, and I guess methods that you can put in place quite quickly and efficiently to make sure that you've adequately and effectively managed the risks that are foreseeable to your business. So if you remember back to the original discussion, you want to make sure you clearly understand your objectives, you've adequately at least recognized the unknown, the inherent uncertainty, but you've then also certainly addressed the foreseeable risk, so the controllable uncertainty associated with your business. So I'll go into what a bow tie is shortly, but technique-wise, what I really love about bow ties, and this is what I call our 3 C's, are that bow ties, more than almost any other risk analysis tool out there, or risk management tool out there, allow you to really focus on these 3 things, the 3 C's. So controls, as in risk controls. Connection, as in connection and interdependencies between bits of your business, between other bits, aspects of your supply chain, all sorts of things. And causality. What I mean by causality is it allows you to show a narrative, pictorial style pathway that is clearly and easily understood by a wide audience. So if you imagine these things, they're kind of almost just like a structured mind map. That's probably a good way to think of it. Everybody knows mind maps. This is just like a slightly structured, more boundaried mind map. They certainly can go into very technical spaces, but they don't need to. So let's get cracking, and I'll show you on the board what an actual bow tie looks like, and we'll do some worked examples so it hopefully gives you some benefit that you can apply to your own business. So a classic bow tie, and this is sort of almost like the cliche 20-year-old example on a bow tie. You've got to start with the unwanted event. So everybody's just thinking COVID-19 at the moment, and they're thinking impact of COVID-19, all that sort of stuff. I want to encourage you to think a little bit more deeply and more critically about the specific aspects of COVID-19 that may directly impact your business and its ability to meet their objectives. So I'll start with a general example, then we'll get more specific. So the general example is, this is how you start a bow tie. You've got to identify what we call let's call it the significant unwanted event. The classic one that everybody uses, it's a real world, real life example, is, let's say, kitchen fire. Okay, so that's the middle. What could happen as a result of a kitchen fire? We could start a house fire. Probably we could end up with a burn, significant or insignificant. Probably could end up with person being killed, person losing life. That's probably just 3 possible outcomes. So a kitchen fire occurs, someone could lose their life, someone could get a significant burn, someone could end up setting fire to the house in general. I mean, they're sort of related, but this is just for illustrative purposes. And then you go, all right, well, what could cause a kitchen fire? Well, we go over to this side then, and we go, what do we think could cause a kitchen fire? Unattended stove. What else could cause a kitchen fire? Could it be an electrical fault? What else? Is there other, God, I'm just thinking out loud here. Electrical fault could be improper use. Stove, you know. Little Johnny decides to try and melt a couple of G.I. Joes or something like that. Your son or daughter decides they want to throw some playing cards into a pot on the stove or something like that, just to see what happens. So you can see in the middle there's the kitchen fire, and you can see the outcome is somebody losing their life, somebody getting a significant burn or setting the house on fire. That could be caused by somebody leaving something unattended on the stove, an electrical fault in the system, or somebody improperly using the stove. That's just, again, illustrative purposes. So you can see this mind map process developing. And you go, all right, well, the beauty of these bad boys is that you go, all right, well, now what we can do is we can see a really easy causal pathway to then go, all right, we want to stop that kitchen fire occurring. So what can we put in place to stop that occurring? So an unattended stove, I'm thinking you could put in like an auto shut-off switch or something like that. Switch or a timer. An electrical fault, you could make sure that you've got RCDs, so you know, safety switches, RCDs. Improper use of the stove, look, I don't know, you could say, you know, only mum and dad use the stove or something like that. So we can see that theoretically, if those three, let's call them risk controls, are in place, they should stop the kitchen fire. I think we probably agree with that. So if the kitchen fire still occurs, so if these risk controls fail, what would prevent these events still happening? So over on this side here, we can talk about, so these are what we call our preventative controls. And over on this side, we call them mitigating. Again, full of wank words today, that's my business and that's how I love to talk, but mitigating controls really are just controls that stop it from being really bad in a practical sense. So what are the mitigating controls that you could put in place to stop a house fire? So you could have fire blankets. You could have fire extinguishers. You know, you could have, what do you call it? Shower, you know, sprinkler systems. I mean, you're not going to have those in a residential house, but you know what I mean, sprinkler systems. So what we can see is that we understand that those controls won't stop the kitchen fire happening, but they will potentially stop somebody losing their life or the house burning down. And once you get to that point, you can see, oops, whoop. What a terrible drawing. Do you remember Mr. Squiggle, like upside down, upside down? That is a very terrible looking bow tie, but a bow tie nonetheless. So that's the core concept underneath. So that might have been a slightly difficult example to follow, but I guess what I'm trying to get across to you guys there is that there's all these big sort of weighty techniques out there, but the reality is the way you apply them in the business can actually be really agile and tactical. And what I'm leading to, hopefully what you're starting to see, is that we've talked a bit about business continuity, this business impact analysis, and this maximum allowable outage time. Even if you don't need or want or have a reason to use those, I would say you can then go straight to a great technique like the bow tie analysis, and you can effectively and in quite a concise fashion, develop up effectively a business continuity plan which incorporates those aspects that I've just spoken about that's relevant to your business using nothing more than a bow tie. I mean, look, ideally you want to have a little bit more substance behind your planning, but at the moment when we're just all trying to respond, back to that PPRR model, that respond space, I would say use one of these bow ties, use them to plan out the way that you're going to, I guess, maintain your business if it's going to be a business that can be maintained. And then we can start to get a little bit more excited about the recovery and back to the planning stage, which is where I think some of the more detailed and weightier topics that I've talked about might become more useful to you. but at the moment we're just going to focus on the bow tie. So let's do hopefully a more real world example based on predictably the COVID-19 state in relation to a business that might match to yours. So look, let's just say, back to that example again, we go to our middle point here, so our actual bow tie. And what I'm also going to add on to this, and I'm not trying to confuse you, is what we call the inherent or hazardous condition that's in play. So at the moment, COVID-19 is present in the community. Right? That's a fact. In fancy pants risk management speak, you might talk about this in terms of scope and context. We're not worrying about any of that sort of detailed stuff today. I just want to put that up there so you can say, well, let's call it the inherent potential hazard or risk is the fact that COVID is around in our community. Okay, so then you want to draw a line and go, well, how the hell is that going to affect my business? And it might be different for every business. So, I'm not talking about everybody just being as broad in their terms as saying COVID-19 outbreak in my business. There might be a specific unwanted event that you're trying to prevent. And I'd encourage you to think at a quite detailed and, don't just jump to sort of conclusions on that based on what your instincts say. So I would say, take a business that provides professional services to another business. The really significant event that's going to impact their business continuity might be the fact, as I said, that they can no longer effectively access their IT infrastructure, or there might be another issue, for example, where you've got real personnel, say, delivering real services in a home. The threat might be that your staff or your personnel are now unable to attend to their job in the normal way. They might no longer be able to deliver their services in a home-based environment if they deliver home-based services in the trade space or in the aged care or caregiving space. So you want to get that event right. So let's say, just as an example, let's say COVID-19 outbreak in my workforce. I'm going to assume that some of you have workforces, some of you are self-employed, some of you this may not be even relevant to. So the actual event we're trying to prevent or we're trying to respond to, or let's say the event that we really is going to have the most significant impact on our business continuity and our ability to deliver our core services, is if you have a COVID-19 outbreak in your workforce. So we go, all right, well, what might happen as a result of that? And it's not, it's the obvious one. So, loss of life. I'm going to get a little bit more businessy here and say what could also happen. It could be loss or suspension of major contracts. I mean, that's ultimately going to be a loss of revenue for the business. Might be non-compliance with your regulator, so as in non-compliance related to whatever relative legislative environment you're operating in, non-compliance with legislation or standards. You might be a business that's certified to a particular or specific standard. Might even result in, if they're not already out there, the ambulance chasers no doubt will be out in coming months if you've got a workforce that are potentially exposed to that. And so it might end up with, litigation, work injury damages claims, all the stuff that comes out of the potential downside of having employees or workers work for you. Litigation, work injury damages. And look, the list could go on. We could end up with 10 or 12 there, but this is just, again, for illustrative purposes, okay? And so what could cause the COVID outbreak? So could it be, so we know that it's present in the community. How is it actually going to get into your workforce in a way where it's going to affect them or let's say your business? So poor hygiene, what I mean is poor personal hygiene. I would say, what do you call it? Lack of social distancing. What I'm really saying there is, non-compliance with social distancing guidelines. Could be shared work surfaces. Could be meetings, and you can probably start to see where I'm going with this. And you probably, because we're small businesses and entrepreneurs, we're all very agile and very smart and very quick to attune ourselves to this. Appreciate that many of you have probably already been through this process and you might be way ahead of me, but that's fine. Want to give you that opportunity to at least see our take on it anyway. Meetings might be travelling for work, as in, you might have a workforce that's travelling in cars together. Might be overseas travel, so you might have people, or you might have their family members that have recently travelled overseas. So that's just a number of them. There's probably a heap more in there. So you go, all right, well, now we understand what we want to prevent, what it could result in, and what are the ways that it could happen. So if you remember back to my 3 C's in terms of controls, connection, causality, think of it as this fancy-pantsy mind map. We go, all right, well, if you're a business, let's say you're a smaller legal practice and you might employ 10 people, 15 people, something like that. You run a real office, you're not remotely located. So you go poor personal hygiene. How do we prevent poor personal hygiene from resulting in a COVID-19 outbreak? We might actually then go to what I know everybody's talking about, let's call it the A teams and B teams control. So the risk control there really is reducing the overall number of people in your workplace at any one time. Lack of social distancing, the way we prevent that might be, and these controls might also be linked as well, but this is just a thought exercise. Lack of social distancing might be splitting teams. As in, you might remove all your non-essential teams, or you might cut them in half and co-locate them other areas. Shared work surfaces. You might go, all right, well, we're going to remove, and you probably can't see at this distance anyway, remove all shared cutlery. Meetings. You go, well, if we're all remote working, so it might be remote working. And there also might be another control here, that's virtual meetings. Travelling in cars. You might redistribute work. You might need to renegotiate contracts. Overseas travel, that's an easy one, You might suspend overseas travel. And again, these are things that I think are already out there happening now, but what I'm trying to bring you into the mindset of is that when you approach them with this systematic risk-based approach, you actually get a better result and a better, what we'll talk about shortly, a better defensibility behind the decisions you're making. And we'll move on to this directors and officers liability around WHS shortly. But so look, I'm going to leave it at that, because then you'd see on the other side here, before I leave it at that, on the other side here, if you do have a workplace outbreak, then you might have an isolation process. You might also want to consider a deep cleaning, like a rapid response cleaning. And then obviously you'd have things that you'd have, your self-isolation, all that sort of stuff. So hopefully you're starting to see this picture of, again, as I said, the bow tie. And look, it's just, again, it's a structured mind map style risk analysis. And me being, I'm a very visual learner. I love this sort of stuff. So as you can see, I'm really excited about it. I just think it's a great way to quickly and easily transfer quite technical knowledge across to a wide audience in a way that's easy to understand. So hopefully you got your head around this bow tie example. And as you've just seen there, even you guys as small business owners and entrepreneurs, we did that in 5 minutes. You could sit down with your team. It might only be 4 people, might be on a Zoom call, and bang out a bow tie. And I guarantee you, when you approach it with this systematic risk management mindset, there'll be times where you just go, oh wow, we didn't think about that. So it's just about making sure that you've made informed decisions, you've minimised your assumptions and your bias, and you've actually got some defensibility behind them. So that is the basics of how you can then deploy one of these bow ties.